Hello and welcome to gaming and welcome to my Resident Evil 2 Remake review. Now, I haven't done a script for this one, so it's going to be a little bit more freeform than usual. So we'll see how it turns out, but played the game, came out about 2 weeks ago, and all I can say is that Capcom, what a way to bring back your franchise. You know, there was Resident Evil 5 and 6 that sort of went more action orientated, and they weren't bad games, but I think a lot of fans sort of felt that, you know, it strayed too far away from what was known in the Resident Evil franchise. We got Resident Evil 7 last year, and it was probably one of my favourite games of the year. Was it last year or was it 2 years ago? Can't remember now. But that was an amazing return to form. It was the sort of more survival horror like the original games. And then we've got this remake of Resident Evil 2. And it's just, in every sense, this is how you do a remake to a game. Just from the ground up, it's been built. And it was just an amazing experience, I thought, to relive this game. Because for me, the Resident Evil franchise, the original 3 games in Raccoon City, in the mansion in Raccoon City, they're Resident Evil to me. They're the story that I loved about the city, Umbrella, the pharmaceutical company. And then when they expanded on the lore with Resident Evil 4, 5 and 6, like, it was still good, but it kind of strayed away from what I loved about the series. So to be getting these games and offering them up like 20 years later, 20 plus years later from when they initially launched, and selling so well. I think, did it do 3 million copies in the first week or something? It shows that there's still an appetite for this series. So, you know, a really good launch, a great idea, and just from the off, the game just looks amazing with the RE engine which was used for Resident Evil 7. I think it's just really good looking graphically. I mean, of course, the early Resident Evil games, Resident Evil 1, 2 and 3, have all aged pretty badly. And that's something you can actually check out in my retro review of the original Resident Evil 2, which is on the way. Stay tuned for that. But yeah, to get this sort of upgrade, I know that we've had the remake of Resident Evil 1, which was done on GameCube, and then it was redone for PlayStation 4 and I think Xbox One. And, you know, that was still in the classic style with the CCTV fixed camera sort of style. But this is, in Resident Evil 2 Remake, is an over-the-shoulder point of view, much like in Resident Evil 4, which at the time when Resident Evil 4 did that was groundbreaking back then, because lots of horror games started adopting that approach from that point on. Dead Space, stuff like that. Obviously, Resident Evil 7 went with the first-person mode, and that worked pretty well, because we've had Resident Evil games in the past in first-person. They were more like on-the-rail shooters that didn't turn out very good. But Resident Evil 7 worked, and I think they did it that way mainly for the VR setting, you know, because you could play it on the PlayStation VR. But this is kind of like a blend of Resident Evil 4 and the inventory system from Resident Evil 7, when I can speak. And it was just really good. As I say, it looked awesome. It looks so good, as you can see here with some of the footage that I'm playing. A couple of things that they have to change with this different style, because when Resident Evil launched 20 odd years ago and it had the fixed camera angles, that could play into the horror element a little bit more, give the claustrophobic feel. And when you're doing a third-person horror game, it's a little bit more difficult for that. You've got to do it in a different way. And I think they did it well here. The aim system is deliberately, if you don't use the assisted aim, that is, if you're on the standard game like what I played, you can get your aim locked in and you pop a shot off. You've got to wait for your aim to reset, because obviously it's sort of like, I guess, like natural. I've never shot a gun, but I'm assuming, you know, obviously it takes a second or two to reset your aim, and that's utilised here in this game. And it works really well, because if you let a zombie get too closely to you and you're popping shots off, and you start blind panicking, you're going to be spraying shots all over the place, missing left and right, and it really worked quite well, I thought. Another aspect of the game that I liked, and I can't really remember, I have played Resident Evil, the original, and I am playing it at the moment for the retro review, but I've not actually got to the point where you meet Mr. X. Now, Mr. X is a tyrant, or the tyrant from this game, and he is dropped into the police station to chase after the G-Virus that Sherry Birkin has, but he also tries to kill sort of anybody that's around, and he chases you around, and it's done so well in this game. I had so many scary moments during my playthrough where he would be sort of chasing after you, and it reminded me a little bit of Alien Isolation, where the AI comes after you. This one was a little bit more scripted than that, because I believe if you stood still for long enough, Mr. X would always home in on your location eventually, but you could prevent this from happening by sort of going around quietly and not running, not banging into things, not making noise, not shooting. And of course, if you'd left any zombies around, which I do to try and save ammo, and you go past them, they make noise because they come after you, and then Mr. X is more alerted to your presence, and he comes to where you are and comes after you. So that was a really, really good element, and it totally changes up the game, because initially you're playing it and you're going cautiously around corners, trying to figure out if you can get by zombies without having to shoot them, and doing the puzzles and stuff. As soon as Mr. X is introduced, that's it. You are running away from him a lot. It just becomes a massive game of hide and seek. And I thought that was quite a cool aspect of this game to bring that in, and it leaves me with a lot of hope for if they do Resident Evil 3 Remake, which they should be able to do pretty easily, because it shares some of the assets from Resident Evil 2, because obviously they're both based in the city and around the police station and stuff like that. Plus, Nemesis hunts you down in Resident Evil 3 very similarly to how Mr. X does. So, yeah, hopefully they get on and do that. So just like the original games, you can play through a couple of scenarios. You've got choice between picking Leon S. Kennedy or picking Claire Redfield, and each has a different sort of playthrough compared to the other character. And the way that I did it was I started with Leon, because I feel like that was the way I played it when I played it years ago as a kid. So I played Kennedy's run through first, and then played Claire as my second run through, and it's interesting to see the sort of two sides of the story, and you actually get the proper ending once you do the second run through. On your first run through, it ends on kind of like a cliffhanger. When you do your second run through with the opposite character, you get to fulfill the proper ending. So it's well worth playing as both characters. I'm not sure if it offers a different sort of side of the story depending on who you pick first or not. I think it might do, and of course this gives the game a lot of replayability, which is never a bad thing really when you buy a game. As long as you've got more content that you can sort of devour, then it's a good thing. I did unlock another mode as well called, I think it's called Survivors, which I haven't checked out yet, but just more content in there, which is great. It was good to see the character models sort of updated and given a modern feel, both based on actors, I believe, or models, and that's good. I guess they did a lot of mocap and stuff like that. Came out looking great. Animations are great. They kept a lot of things from the original, but they also expanded on little bits, changed little bits up. So, like in the start, you're in a gas station. That's where you meet each other, whereas I believe in the original it was in a diner where the two characters met each other, but they did keep elements similar, like the bit where Leon shouts "get down" to Claire and he shoots a zombie behind her. Of course, supporting characters Ada Wong and Sherry are both in the game as they were in the original, and it kind of expands a little bit on the original story, but not too much. It sticks pretty close to it, and I think, if I'm being nitpicky, this is the only thing that I think they could have done more with. Now, the game, for my playthrough, I've done the 2 scenarios, and I think I've come out about 14 hours, which is fine and very respectable, and you know, most games are only 8 hours long these days. That's fine. But for me, I feel that they maybe could have just gone a little bit further and maybe expanded out on the story just a little bit more, giving it a little bit more context and stuff. But that's me being very nitpicky, because what we got was just an amazing remake. This is what you do to do a remake, and we're kind of in that sort of zone at the minute, aren't we? It's a popular thing. I know a lot of the others are remasters, and the Spyro Reignited trilogy, and we've had the Crash Bandicoot, which are more remasters. But if companies are doing that, you know, do them to this standard, then absolutely no problem with it happening, because unlike television and film, remakes tend to not work too well. In television and film, when I can speak properly, but in gaming so far, it's worked fairly well from what we've seen recently. So I'd be definitely down for seeing Resident Evil 3 come in as a remake as well. It can bring a new audience into these original games and make people want to check out your past work, I guess. You know, you'd be bringing in a new generation of fans by releasing these games. And it makes sense as well to sort of pair it with the current story as well. So obviously Resident Evil 7 has strayed away from the all-out sort of Umbrella thing, and it's gone on its own side of things. But to do it concurrently with it, I think that's a cool idea. And there's still room beyond sort of Resident Evil 3, because Code Veronica was a great game as well. So, you know, maybe they could go down the way of doing that as a remake eventually as well. So one of the elements that they kept in, and they did it with Resident Evil 7 as well, was the inventory system, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense and never has done. It's one of those sort of gaming tropes that, you know, doesn't make realistic sense. But having been sort of a long-time player of the series, you know, it was a welcome sort of to see it be in there. And just inventory management, knowing what you can pick up and knowing what to drop and knowing where to go and stuff. A big part of Resident Evil. What I did like in this game, though, was that when you entered a room and you spotted some items, even if you couldn't pick them up because your inventory was full, it would mark it on your map. And I think that's a really, really cool addition to the series. Very helpful. Makes the game a little bit easier, because, you know, sometimes you will go somewhere and you'll have a full inventory and you can't pick up, say, a really important piece of a puzzle that you've got to do, and then you go back to the storeroom to change out your items, and you can't remember. This is the original I'm talking about. You maybe couldn't remember where the item was. So to have this in the game now, where it marks it down on the map's great. Of course, you've got to find the map first, I believe, for this to work. So there is still a bit of incentive in sort of hunting everything down. So I'm not a very jumpy person, to be honest, but this game really got me. There was the moment with the liquor, which just totally surprised me. And then there was a moment later on with another liquor in I think it was my second playthrough with Claire, where one was just dropped into a room. Scared the hell out of me. This sounds like these are a little bit crazier. Whoever's coming for me. Oh no, it's someone crawling. I can probably avoid them. Come on. Oh no. Oh my god, it's a liquor. Oh, I actually jumped. No! I legitimately jumped then. Obviously, Mr. X chasing you down, pretty scary. And that led to some really tense moments. I did think that the boss battles were a little bit easy. I did take quite a bit of punishment during those boss battles, but I never actually really died often. In fact, the only times that I did die during my run-throughs were the part with Ada in the incinerator, which I sort of mistook what the puzzle actually was that I was supposed to do. And then I think I died a couple of times on Claire's run-through, just because I ran out of ammo. But other than that, it was fairly easy. I played it on a standard setting, so not too difficult. So it might be interesting to play it on the hardcore mode and see how difficult it really is. One thing I will say is definitely make sure that you're conserving your shots, conserving your ammo, and doing your best not to waste any, because you do start to run out and it gets really difficult if you run out. So pretty much that's it for this review of Resident Evil 2. All I can tell you is, if you haven't got it, definitely go out and pick it up. Considering it's a remake, it's already sort of front runner for Game of the Year for me. This is just how you do it, and Capcom have done really well at bringing this series back from not the depths or anything, but you know, it did waver a little bit with Resident Evil 6. So with Resident Evil 7 and then this remake, they've really done a good job at getting it back into the forefront of the gaming sphere. And yeah, definitely pick it up. For me, it's a 9 out of 10, pretty much near perfect, and I'm really hoping for Resident Evil 8 to come out in a couple of years, and hopefully to see Resident Evil 3 remade with Nemesis hunting us down across Raccoon City and playing as my favourite character, Jill Valentine. I hope you've enjoyed the review, guys. Please do subscribe and leave a like if you've enjoyed the video, and we will see you in our next video. Look out for the retro review on the original Resident Evil 2. Goodbye.